Let them talk.
Paul DiRienzo, and Clare Donahue is my guest, and she's from, get it right, the Sane Energy Project, which is working on fracking, I guess, right? And oil pipelines and
gas pipelines.
Liquid natural gas tank farms out floating out in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Long Island. I love this map here you guys have, which is, let me get in the right direction. There I am. Okay, good. I'm looking at the right camera. All right, and there it is. This is very interesting because it shows 4 big ugly blotches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, and the biggest one is over there in the Rockaway. So we're going to talk about these 4 projects and what they mean for the folks who live in these communities. And you can see who you are. 2 are in Manhattan, 1 in Staten Island, and out there in Queens, Brooklyn, in the Rockaways, like you haven't had enough problems out there in the Rockaways. And so we're going to discuss that and find out what we can and you can do about this problem, this threat. You know, I think it's a threat, you know, to us, even though some might say it's not a threat. Some might say it's a necessity. Some might say this is what it's all about, that this is growth in technology and the future, and get used to it. They said that about plutonium, too, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny that this is, would be framed as the modern way and an improvement, when in fact this is, last century's technology. This is fossil fuel development, and if we were truly being modern, we'd be doing what China and Europe are doing, and greatly developing renewable energy.
Like
instead.
Solar and wind power and things like that, right? Although those are controversial too. At some point, every time some new system
somebody's
comes
unhappy
up, somebody's
about everything.
Protest it, right?
But in terms of the level of harm created by renewable energy, people worry about birds being killed by wind turbines. If you look at the statistics,
views.
I would much rather lay on a beach and look out and see wind turbines than I would rather look out and see LNG tankers, and those are the choices we're facing. But in fact, most of the wind farms are sited out of sight.
I'm just being facetious.
No, well,
but I know
this is
people
what
feel
comes
that
up.
way.
This is what comes up.
Absolutely. And so let's go through. First of all, tell me about your organization, Sane Energy Project.org.
Yeah, so we formed in 2011 in response to learning that the Spectra pipeline was being planned through the West Village of Manhattan. We had been involved fighting fracking. I grew up in Queens near the Rockaways and in upstate New York. So I learned about fracking, got involved with some people. And then because I accidentally went to a West Village Community Board meeting thinking they were talking about fracking, and in fact they were making a presentation about the Spectra pipeline, the safest pipeline that they would ever build.
Okay, that's a promise.
And it sounded to me like a terrible idea.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll drop in other things. So working on a project about the nuclear weapons and the nuclear fuel cycle, which we were all told would be safe and well handled.
Sure.
And then many decades later, it turned out they were just dumping it in the river and things like that.
Right.
So that's why it's like not going into Syria. It's like, sorry, I know it's terrible what's happening there, but I don't trust you. There's a reason for that distrust. Okay, let's look at these. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 1, Spectra Pipeline Manhattan, a large diameter, high pressure gas pipeline entering Manhattan at the Gainesville Peninsula in the densely populated West Village. It could bring high doses of radon to all 5 boroughs of homes in New York City. Well, there's a lot there. What happened with Spectra Pipeline Manhattan?
Okay, so the Spectra pipeline is currently under construction in its Manhattan portion. It's about 90% complete. There's two small connections that have to be made. It goes into Manhattan. It basically connects into the Con Ed grid in Manhattan, but it travels under the Hudson River. It crosses the Hudson River at the Hoboken Path station.
Okay.
Extremely high traffic area.
Sure. Why should I care?
Why should you care?
Yes, or any of us.
Well,
or the people in that path station.
There's a great risk of explosion, when something goes wrong with these pipelines, and the pipeline explosions that have been demonstrated have happened either in rural places where there's a very low population. The densest population was in San Bruno, California, which was suburban. So a lot less dense than places like Manhattan, Jersey City, Staten Island, where this pipeline goes through.
A gas pipeline can explode, is what you're saying. It's possible.
There is, in fact, a gas pipeline accident about every day in America. But because they happen out in these rural places, you don't really hear much about it. You know, they blow up because some guy, you know, cuts into one with a backhoe accidentally, and, you know, some jackrabbits get killed, you know, occasionally, you know, a human injury or death. But because they're in these very rural places, they don't create a lot of news.
Right.
However, in San Bruno, when a pipeline of this diameter and pressure blew up, it took out 38 homes. It killed 8 people and did, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. The rebuilding of the town and the pipeline are into the billions, costs which are being passed on to the ratepayers in California.
Really?
Yeah, so
the ratepayers are liable for this.
in the end, it's the ratepayers who will cover the cost of this explosion. So if you took what happened in San Bruno, where you had the gas flowing and burning for hours, it blew out a water main so that when the firemen came to the scene, they couldn't hook up to the hydrants. That same scenario could happen here in the West Village because the pipeline crosses the new water mains that have just been built up and down the West Side Highway. It crosses the water main, so the same scenario could happen.
How did they get this? How come the community, the West Village, is a very political, activist community. How come this was ramrodded right through their neighborhood?
Well, you know, that's a really great question, and this is just an example of what's happening everywhere in America. If you look at, you know, the West Village, you know, now historically politically active, still very politically active, extremely wealthy, extremely high, you know, land values.
Sure.
If a neighborhood like this gets ramrodded, imagine what happens in communities which have a lot less power and a lot less wealth.
Sure.
And this is what's happening all over the country and, in fact, globally. These projects are being ramrodded through. So it's a federal project. It's interstate. So, you know, the process of fighting this is very complicated. The agency that's involved with it, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which you might think is a watchdog agency until you get involved in something like this.
Is it part of the DOE?
It's related to the Department of Energy, right? So, but its job is not to ask whether or not projects like this are safe or desirable.
Sure.
Its mandate is to get them built as quickly as possible.
Sure.
And that's basically what's happening.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. That's pretty much the way it's always been.
This is, and, you know, with shale gas development now, because people, you know, believe this should give us energy independence and be the Saudi Arabia of gas.
And being federal,
even more so.
The local people didn't have the same power over the local federal officials as they do over the local officials.
Right, and, you know, I mean, what happened in Spectra is just an example of what will happen everywhere. You know, so you find out about this as a community. You've never dealt with a pipeline before. You're sort of lost. You're like, well, what agency is involved in this? What are you supposed to do? How do you respond? You have to get up to speed on these very complex technical documents. You know, the environmental impact statement for the Spectra pipeline was 1,500 pages. It was released on Labor Day Friday. You know, so this kind of thing happens all the time.
Okay, so it's a political. I want to talk about the mayor, because right as we're speaking, I guess the mayoral candidates are lining up to debate these very issues, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted to briefly go on to the Transco Meter. What's a metering station? That's up in looks like up in Harlem.
Right. So you know where the Harlem Fairway is on the West Side Highway on 134th Street.
Yeah.
Right now, there has been an existing metering station there. That's the main.
What's a metering station?
Metering stations control the level of pressure. So it's known as the city gate. So it's where the gas comes in from outside the city and then connects to the Con Edison grid. That has been until now one of the main entry points for gas coming into New York City. It's this rickety shed out on the Hudson River, and so they're now enlarging that pipe and upgrading that facility to handle more gas. And the thing with the Spectra pipeline, with the Transco pipeline, with the Rockaway pipeline.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
All of these pipes are now meant to bring this shale gas from Pennsylvania, this fracked gas from Pennsylvania.
Right. That's the real issue here. It's because the next thing I was going to say, and I wanted to talk about the other pipeline, but also, isn't natural gas supposed to be the clean energy? Isn't it supposed to be the energy that's going to take us off of dependency on Syria and Saudi Arabia?
Right.
I don't think Syria has any oil, and it might. And is this going to? Is this something that is just sort of like people complaining about windmills blocking their view when this is, what do you want already? This is what you wanted, isn't it?
Right. Is this a NIMBY issue?
Yes.
Well, instead of not in my backyard, our position is not on planet Earth.
Okay.
Okay. Nope. So the idea that gas is clean burning turns out to be a fallacy. So if you lived in a bubble and you burned coal and you burned gas is slightly cleaner in the burning. But it turns out that in the extraction and in the production cycle, gas actually turns out to be worse than coal for the climate. And the big problem with gas is, so coal creates carbon dioxide. Gas is methane. Methane turns out to be 105 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So if you just have blinders on and you say, we're only interested in getting our carbon low, you're missing the whole point. The point is greenhouse gases, not carbon. And methane has much more of an effect in the short term, so it's worse for the climate over a 20-year cycle.
Okay.
Well, the 20-year cycle is what counts right now because we're basically at the tipping point with the climate. So if we don't pull back the warming now, it won't matter what's happening in 100 years.
Okay, we don't want oil, we don't want coal, we don't want nuclear, now we don't want gas. Am I supposed to throw out my iPhone? I mean, what are we supposed to do for electricity? Look at all of this around us.
Right. Well, so interestingly, there's a study by this guy called Mark Jacobson out of Stanford University in California. And a couple of years ago, he created a report that showed how the entire world could operate on renewables by 2030, get all of our new increased electricity needs met by 2030 entirely on renewables, get all of our energy met by 2050.
Solar and wind, basically.
Right. So heavy emphasis on offshore wind. He's now done another study about how New York State could be entirely renewable by 2030. Instead of fracking, if we got on it, we could be there already. And you think, okay, so it's 2013, 2030 is not that far away.
Sure.
We've just gone through 3 terms of the Bloomberg mayoral, right?
Yes.
So 12 years.
And nothing to
In
advance.
that time, if we move forward with 3 more mayoral terms, we could be almost there, almost 100% renewable. And Germany is demonstrating that it can be done. Germany now, they're closing down their nuclear plants because they're not profitable, right? They're closing down their coal because it's not profitable.
Sure.
They're proving that it can happen, that we can get cheaper, better electricity with less health costs to us, and the great thing about renewable energy is it's like getting extra energy because renewable energy is so much more efficient than burning energy. You actually get 32% more energy immediately. So it's as if you've been given a loan.
I see.
It's like
you don't have to
as
build
if
up
you
to
can
it.
grow. By changing over, you can grow the amount of energy you use.
Okay, Clare Donahue is joining us. You were discussing fracking. She's from the organization Sane Energy Project and the oil pipelines that are being installed all over New York.
Gas pipelines.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm sorry. Did I say oil? Gas, oil. Well, for years it was oil pipelines.
Sure.
Now it's gas pipelines. I know. I have to get with it. Okay, and gas pipelines that are being built everywhere, liquid natural gas plants that are being built here. That's why I have you on, so I can learn all this stuff, and all of us can.
Great.
And so we're on the air right now, 212-757-1541. You can see it on the screen. Call if you have a question. You want to add something to the discussion, feel free to call, and we'll take your questions. So that's the number, and we're here. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and this is Let Them Talk. The Rockaway Pipeline. Now, it's sort of, I actually like this. There's 2 pictures here. I'll put them both up. Here are I'll put them up here for the camera to see. There they are, good. And on the yellow sheet shows actually offshore. If you look at the top of the drawing on the yellow sheet here, you'll see Long Island, Jones Beach, Long Beach, Rockaways. Now you'll see a solid black line which corresponds with the red line in my right hand, right over here.
Right.
There's a red line, and you notice a big thick black line that runs offshore. That's an underwater pipeline, right?
That's an existing gas pipeline
Right.
that runs parallel to the shore.
And what is that little weird field there on the yellow one here on this finger?
Yes,
There's a
the little-
field, and
it
that's
looks like a
out
wine
off,
bottle,
yeah,
right?
offshore, and they call that the proposed offshore.
Well, there are two projects
And-
at play
yeah.
right now. One is a proposed wind farm.
Okay.
That's the thing that looks like a bottle.
Uh-huh.
And right in the middle of where the wind farm is proposed an LNG port, liquefied natural gas. So what that is, it's a place where these huge tanker ships filled with explosive liquefied natural gas would pull up as if to an offshore gas station and unload into a pipeline that would join that existing pipeline.
I see, and
And
that's
then
what
the
that
Rockaway
thick,
pipeline will
that thick
also
red
go up
line,
there.
right?
Yeah.
That would carry it right up what, Flatbush Avenue?
Right up Flatbush Avenue,
That's what
right
it
to
says
the
here, yeah.
the Kings Plaza shopping
Right.
mall.
And is that under construction, or is
That is
happening?
also well. So this is what's happening. The Rockaway pipeline is another federal project, and because it had to go through a national park, Gateway National Park, you know, this restored wetland
Sure.
bird sanctuary
Right.
in Rockaway, they actually had to change the law to get it approved.
to allow that to happen.
Right. So midnight on a Friday, I swear, you know, Congress passed a law to allow this pipeline to
I
be
believe you.
approved.
Midnight on a Friday, right?
Typical. So that portion of the pipeline is under FERC approval,
Okay.
the federal approval, and is going through its process. That process will probably take about a year. But the portion of the pipeline that is built by National Grid, which is the Con Ed of Brooklyn and Queens,
Yes.
is already under construction. So, you know, even though this project has not been reviewed, has not had an environmental review, they're
Yes.
building the other portion of it.
Okay.
So
We're going to give it a try. We've been doing pretty well with calls recently. You're on the air joining us on Let Them Talk. Go ahead.
Hey, I kind of wanted to talk about the pipeline a little bit.
Go right ahead.
I was just wondering if your co-host would love to get pipelined by me.
Oh, come on. Again. Go. Enough. We gave it a try. Sorry about that. We'll hopefully get an intelligent call to come in later. But let's continue on and talk about... this is all because of this natural... Why? Can you tell us a little bit about the politics behind all of this? What are our... Right now, the mayoral candidates are meeting. The mayoral candidates are going to be debating these issues. I hope somebody's going to ask them about it. How are they standing on this?
the current mayoral candidates are pretty much even, except for one person. All of the politicians will say that they are against fracking in our watershed. In our watershed is code for I'm for fracking everywhere else.
Okay.
So the theory is that our watershed is protected.
I see.
It's not actually, because if you frack everywhere around it, your watershed is going to be contaminated. And
Sure.
the
What is a watershed?
The watershed are the upstate reservoirs, which is near where I grew up, that feed New York City. And according to the rules that are proposed, you could put a drill rig 1,000 feet from the reservoirs. Now, you can go down into the ground 1,000 feet from the reservoirs, but the
Sure.
laterals off of these drills go 5 miles out.
So you can actually go,
You actually go
down
under.
and then sideways.
Right, down and sideways, under your reservoir.
Okay.
And you know, the New York City water system is more than 100 years old. They're these brittle cement pipes.
Yes.
Fracking has been proven to cause earthquakes and
Yeah.
to cause seismic activity,
Sure,
which
there's some
could
scary
break
stuff in
apart,
Pennsylvania all the time, right?
break apart our water system. So the idea that politicians
Break the
punt by
aqueducts
saying,
or something.
you know, I'm against fracking in our watershed is a meaningless position, and that is the position of most of the candidates,
Who
with the
wants-
exception of John Liu. John
Okay.
Liu is the one candidate who has said, I'm 100% against fracking,
Okay.
without qualifying it. And he is the only candidate who has offered any opposition to the Spectra pipeline and the Rockaway pipeline. You know, he believes that this is not, you know, from a fiscal position. This is not a good investment for New York City's energy future.
What is that? What do you think the governor is going to do in New York? I mean, we have a moratorium for now while they're studying it, right?
Basically, the governor is just punting and stalling. I think my feeling is he probably doesn't want to have to make a decision on this for as long as he is in office until 2014. But the other thing that's happening, and that relates to the infrastructure build out, is that as far as the drillers are concerned, right now moving into New York is not to their advantage. They've got all their equipment in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
They're raping and pillaging there. They're getting the gas they want. Rather than split their resources and bring it into New York, what they're waiting for is for the infrastructure to be built out. There's a new thing that the EPA has created called green completion. And the idea with green completion is that you shouldn't drill until you have a pipeline in place to feed the gas into. Well, that's what's happening. So for the next 2 years, the industry is trying to build the pipelines. They're trying to build all these pipelines into New York City. They're trying to build several pipelines in upstate New York and other infrastructure support systems.
Sure.
There are 26 projects in upstate New York proposed at this moment that are going through their review. And according to the drillers, once all of those pieces are in place, then they'll come in and frack New York, because then they'll have the pipelines, they'll have the service stations. There's a facility called Schlumberger up by the Finger Lakes that would service this with chemicals, with the silica that they need to frack, with water trains that bring in millions of gallons of water. And then they're also in the Finger Lakes trying to convert. This is, you won't believe me when I tell you this.
I believe you.
They're trying to convert these old salt caverns that are underground. They want to fill them with liquefied natural gas, so that they'll have their service and they'll have their storage and they'll have all the pipelines and they'll be all set up. So New York is not out of danger yet.
What's wrong with fracking? Sounds like it's actually in danger a lot.
Yeah.
What's wrong with fracking? What does fracking do that makes it dangerous?
To the person who's never heard about fracking, if you just describe what it is, it sounds like an Osama bin Laden, Marvel Comics, tale of woe. I mean, you drill underground, and you turn the drill horizontally to go through this layer of shale, which is this very hard rock that runs in horizontal strata, and then you set off explosives to break that apart. And by cracking this hard shale, the gas is released.
They did it with atom bombs in 1968.
They did,
yes. Nuclear fracking in New Mexico.
What could we use that would, break this apart? And it worked.
They dropped an atom bomb down a mine shaft.
It just made the gas so radioactive that they couldn't use it. Otherwise, I'm sure
they
they'd be
did
doing
burn it off and let it just go into the air in the environment.
They actually captured it in that experiment.
Really?
Because they realized that it was so radioactive.
Where is it now? It's probably sitting in a tank somewhere to this day.
That's a good question. God.
Yeah.
So the problem with fracking is they need all of these lubricants and antibacterials and chemicals to make this whole system work.
Why antibacterials? That's the first I heard of that.
Because they're underground and it's water and you're trying to prevent mold from it. It's like,
right.
So these are all chemicals
that
that
up your
are
equipment and stuff, right?
Unidentified chemicals.
Interesting.
400,000 pounds of chemicals every time you frack. And now we're hearing that the amount of water they're using with each frack job, because these jobs are getting bigger and bigger. In the early years, they said 5 million gallons. Now we're hearing that they're using up to 30 million gallons of water every time.
And what do they use that water for? What's the purpose of 30 million gallons of water? What do they do with that?
It's you're basically forcing this down underground so that you're cracking open the rock.
Oh, it's the force of the water that breaks open the rock.
The water is carrying all these chemicals and silica.
I see.
The silica, they say there's nothing in it but water and sand. The sand is silica, which is very, very fine particulate matter. It has the same effect on your lungs as asbestos. It's so fine that if you inhale it, it creates silicosis instead of asbestosis. So all of these pieces are very toxic to humans.
Yeah.
And then once you crack this rock underground, you have no control over what happens next. Those cracks are now enlarging fissures that exist under earth that you have no idea where they connect.
Okay.
and these chemicals are working their way up to the surface towards our aquifers. So in places where it's been done, people can turn on their water faucets and set their water on fire.
Those are not set up pictures. Those are real pictures.
Those are
So
real
I've seen that
pictures.
on the internet. You can go on in
You go to
YouTube or
Gaslight.
whatever you want to go on and see that people. So that's not fake. They're really doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a movie, a documentary by a guy named Josh Fox. He's traveled all over the country where fracking has been done and filmed this scene over and over and over again. So
And people lighting their water on fire.
Yeah.
Because the gas is coming out of the water.
Right, and people are told to move out of their houses because if they take a shower, their house could explode.
A couple minutes left. Clare, Donahue, another scary episode of Let Them Talk, scaring the heck out of everybody. You're from Sane Energy Project, saneenergyproject.org, and occupythepipeline.com. Okay, and we've been talking about the Spectra pipeline, Transco metering station, the Rockaway pipeline. These are all big projects that are going on in New York that are sort of the infrastructure, as you were saying, of the fracking empire that's being built around here. So tell us what's happening. What can we do about this?
So
can we have hope?
One project that we can actually stop is happening right now, and that's the LNG port that's planned off the Rockaways, off
Liquid
Jones
natural
Beach.
gas.
Liquefied natural gas.
Okay.
This project requires the approval of Governors Christie and Governors Cuomo. It's such a bad project that last time they tried to build it just in New Jersey, and Governor Christie vetoed it. That's how bad it is. Christie was against it.
What should people do?
We need you to call Governor Cuomo's office and tell him, please veto the Liberty LNG port. And for anyone who hasn't done that before, it can seem like a really odd thing to do, to call up a governor's office. It's really easy. You dial, you get a receptionist, they'll ask you what zip code you're from, what you're calling about, and that's literally all you have to say. Please tell Governor Cuomo to veto the Liberty LNG port. And we need you to call in the next week because the decision is coming up, and we really need him. The number to call Governor Cuomo is 518-474-8390.
Okay.
518-474-8390.
Thank you,
It's really
Clare,
easy.
for joining us on Let Them Talk, and we'll see
Thanks
you
for
next
having me.
week. Thank you very much.